I want to cross back now to Gareth Edwards. I mean, Gareth, you had been speaking to eyewitnesses, throughout the entire time, speaking to one lady who had resided in the building, another gentleman who had actually witnessed everything. And I can imagine how traumatic all these events were. I mean, this started, I understand, from as early as 1:30 this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the eyewitnesses that I spoke to about an hour ago, and I was curious to find out, he was standing basically where our position is now. So you've got the building that's burnt out behind us, Tumza, and he was standing roughly where I am at the moment, busy looking across at this building on fire. And he was describing people jumping out of the third floor onto the top of the roof over there. But if, Taborga, I'm not sure if we can get those windows on the side of the building just above the EMS truck. You'll see there's blankets hanging out on the first floor there, Taborga, and you'll see items of clothing hanging out the window. It's on that, I think it's the second floor. I'm sure it looks like it's maybe a blanket or a curtain. I can't quite tell from here. What people were doing, T, according to this eyewitness, is they were using that. They were obviously tying it to the window frame, I imagine, and lowering themselves down. Here's the problem, though. In the panic, in the screaming, in the dark, in the heat, a lot of people weren't actually able to hold on. Some people were trying to help others, perhaps friends, perhaps family members down, and some people had actually slipped. And even though you can't quite tell from this position, if I had to step away, I would give that a good 15 meters, maybe 20 meters up. And if you were not very, very injured from that fall, because it's just concrete at the bottom, you're falling flat onto the pavement, you're going to injure yourself. Then you go another 5-6 meters up to the third floor or fourth floor, and you can see people that were leaving blankets outside of their windows there to try and do the same thing. So that's where a lot of people were found that were either injured or sadly had died as a result of that. But when you talk about witnesses telling us, Tumza, that there were gates locked inside, while I was listening to Heidi Jokos talking to Musima Imani and a few of the other officials, I have an unnamed EMS source that came to talk to me and told me that inside this main building, Taborga, if we can come back to the main building down here, Taborga, you'll see at the bottom, below all the rooms that are burnt out, there's actually a basement below the building, which the EMS and the firefighters had to use to get in. Think of it as the basement of a building, ordinarily, I suppose, where cars would park. And what they were telling me is that there were shacks inside of this basement. So I want you to just try and imagine this. You've got a hijacked building, clearly a derelict building, even before it was destroyed by a fire. This was a derelict building. It was a hijacked building. But then you have shacks, like you would see in informal settlements, in the basement of the building. So that's where the firefighters are trying to make their way through, because the first floor, which is this main entrance, was too hot for them to actually get through. So there's the first issue they were dealing with. The second issue they were dealing with is those security gates you were talking about people locking themselves in at night. Obviously you would. You're quite right, Tumza. Who doesn't lock their door? Who doesn't lock their gate at night? The issue was there was burglar gates, security gates, thick steel security gates at most of the emergency exits, which is very worrying. Those were the gates that were locked. The source telling me they remember between 3 and 4 security gates blocking the emergency exits on the very far end of the building, which, if you look at where most of the smoke is and that black soot on the side of the building, it's sort of between room 2 and room 7. And there's actually emergency exit doors on the other side of that building. And those were blocked and locked, so nobody was able to get through them. And that witness we were talking about said that he knows of a stampede that took place inside. He'd spoken to those who'd made it out, but before they'd left to go get medical treatment, they told him that there was a stampede of some kind inside the building. So I suppose all that we have right now is just to go on what the eyewitnesses are saying, but we're starting to get a very clear sense of what has actually happened inside the building. I'm seeing a few pathology members making their way under the tape. There they go, just past one of the other media crew. At the moment, I'm seeing 1 or 2 of them. I think they're going to be making their way to the other side of one of these fire trucks. It's called an air truck 03, because a lot of the bodies are still there. Obviously, pathology is going to be coming to remove them once they've been processed, once they've been dealt with the way that authorities need them to be, and from there take it. So there goes the pathology team at the moment. Also just seen an entire crew of firefighters coming out to my left-hand side, but they're now behind this vehicle. So there's a lot of movement going on here as far as the officials on the ground, the first responders are concerned. But Tumza, as I come back to you, that's just the update I have from an unnamed EMS source, just giving me an idea of what it looked like inside. This was somebody and his team who'd been in there. They had to break down the doors, they had to cut the locks, they were walking over dead bodies, they were walking through these shacks in the basement, making their way up to those rooms where there were these partitions. They had to break them down to try and get to people. This has been a mitigated disaster as far as housing in Johannesburg is concerned. I'll try and get some more info and come back to you a bit later, Tumza.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking like still very much an active scene there, Gareth. And we know that, the blaze started as early as 1:30 this morning, but you could see the work, the amount of work that emergency services still has to maneuver around, with you rightfully describing how inside having to break down and tear down those partitions, trying to make their way to find any bodies there to recover. I suppose informs much of the delay that we're seeing from moving from the first floor all the way to the fifth floor in clearing out the scene, all the recoveries that need to be made before then handing over the crime scene to the SAPS for their investigations. It looks like we'll still be there for some time.